What is up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Big show today. Of course, the Champions League just returned. I'm going to spend the first segment talking about that like we typically do. That's what this show is generally designed for, is to talk Champions League above all else. And then, second half of the show is going to be Yates Report, NWSL, everything that has happened this week. I was in those press conferences after the Yates Report came out, both with Sally Yates and U.S. Soccer President Cindy Parlow-Cone. I watched the E60 that just aired right after the report. I have plenty to say. I will not ignore that. That is going to be discussed. But we're going to go Champions League first, highlighting some of these sort of higher profile or more important results and touching on as many as we can before we get to other news. The only place I want to start this week is what Napoli did to Ajax and what Napoli have generally done this season. Talked about it a little bit. You'll mention it here or there. Sometimes I'll mention their bigger Serie A wins. Of course, talked about what they did to Liverpool. But I want to take a good minute to really let this all soak in. Napoli have the most goals, the most shots, and the most shots on target in the Champions League this season. They have the best goal differential in the Champions League this season. And they're doing this in a group with Liverpool, Ajax, who didn't lose a group stage game last season, and a team that made the Europa League final last season. And one of my new favorite facts I found, Napoli now have, across all competitions, as many players with at least 3 goals as Manchester City and PSG combined. Now, yes, City have Haaland, PSG have Neymar, Mbappe, Messi. They're built a little bit differently. I'm not actually trying to argue Napoli's attack is quite on the same level as those two. My point is more, when you think of those teams, and specifically Manchester City, you think about the depth, right? The fact that you have Grealish, Foden, Mahrez, Julian Alvarez is putting in goals, Ilkay Gundogan, Bernardo Silva. You go down the list. There's always 5, 6, 7 attackers that are chipping in goals. And then, of course, you have Haaland, who is the star. But that's essentially what Napoli have in terms of the role players and the depth and the amount of guys contributing goals. It is remarkable what they have done. And I've mentioned this before, but right, this idea that I came into this season, and I will still say I think this was fair, wondering how you were going to replace Kalidou Koulibaly, Lorenzo Insigne, Dries Mertens, staples of your team, and key players. And Napoli have found more than competent replacements for all of them, and arguably have actually increased their depth. And have, 3 legit strikers producing goals. And so when Victor Osimhen gets hurt, it's not a huge deal at all because you got other guys ready to step up and they're scoring goals left and right too. And Napoli have had stretches, including last season, where they have hung with the best teams in Italy for extended periods. It has never looked like this, though. They have never humiliated teams the way they have so far. We are talking about 3 of the most storied clubs in the history of this sport. And Napoli are obliterating them. It is absolutely incredible. It's not like this is an easy group they're doing this in. And of course, they're also not compromising anything domestically as they're, tied on points, but sitting atop Serie A. And the final thing I will say here is, I think I expressed this at least Maybe it was after the Liverpool game. Maybe it was after one of their Serie A wins. I think I've expressed this at least once. But I will always be skeptical of Napoli's ability to put it together for a full season because I really thought they had a chance last season, and I ended up being wrong on that. So I'm a little hesitant to jump on the bandwagon again. The difference is, though, and we're going to get to AC Milan here in a little bit, and we're also going to talk about Inter. I'm looking at the teams in Italy, and I just don't trust any of them. And what Napoli have done across both the Champions League and Serie A, they're forcing you to trust them. Do I think it's going to go this well the entire rest of the season? No. There's going to be a whether it's, a quarterfinal exit that they feel like they probably should have gotten to the semis the way they've been playing, or something goes wrong in the round of 16 and it's a Champions League frustration, or they have a stretch where, they have a draw and 2 losses in the Serie A something. I do not expect them to coast and continue to play like a top 5. Arguably a top 3 might be a little bit of a stretch, but they are absolutely playing like a top 5 team in the world right now. Do I feel like they're going to fall back into the more 6 to 10 range? Yes, I'm still going to stick to that belief for now. But my goodness, they've been impressive. So I wanted to take a moment to really acknowledge that and give Napoli their props because they've been outstanding. And on the Ajax side of this, I talked about this heading into the Liverpool game. Liverpool got that win. Liverpool took care of business against Rangers. Ajax did not take care of business. And all of a sudden, the pressure in this group flipped from Liverpool to Ajax. Ajax now have work to do to avoid being the team that drops to the Europa League in this group. In 2 games, by winning the head-to-head and doing what they're supposed to against Rangers, Liverpool have put themselves back in the driver's seat for that second spot. I don't see Napoli conceding enough in the second half of this group to not finish in first. It's just gone too well. They're in too good of a position. But now, if you're Ajax, you've got to find a way to take points off Napoli, take points off Liverpool. And even a point here would have gone a long way to sort of regaining control of that second spot. And instead, now Liverpool is the team in control there. But this is ultimately more about Napoli for me. I wanted to acknowledge what they're doing because it is something special. Game number 2. Inter 1, Barcelona 0. We'll stick with the Tuesday games first and then get to one on Wednesday. Sometimes you just have to find a way to win, and that is what Inter did. This group has not gone well for them particularly. I still think they're a clear team 3, and so you had to win this game. Otherwise, you are in a massive hole. And it was their worst XG performance of the season, according to the StatsBomb data FBref provides, by a significant margin. But you get one great moment from Cançalhanoğlu, and you find a way to get the 3 points. They didn't do much of anything outside of that offensively, but Barcelona were not spectacular. Robert Lewandowski did not have a good game again. It looked different than his bad game against Bayern, but he's kind of feasting off Victoria Pilsen at this point in the Champions League. You need him to produce against these other 2 teams. They get the goal disallowed for what I feel like was just an unfortunate handball. It's absolutely a handball leading to the build up to a goal. You have to wipe it off. There's no debate about that. But it's just an unlucky break. Inter, now kind of the roles with VAR reversed in the first half, but Inter catch that break there. I really think Barca might have gone on to win this game had they gotten that goal. But ultimately, there are 2 points here I want to make about Barca. One, you can talk all you want, and Xavi was harping on this after the Bayern game, about being the better team and deserving to win. In this group, you gotta actually put the points on the board and you gotta score the goals. Other groups, you have a much larger margin for error, where if you have one or two games like that, you still feel good overall about where you're at and your ability to produce what you need in the second half of the group stage. Now you're one more game, whether it's an unlucky break, another game where you just can't put the ball in the net, a bad performance, whatever it might be, away from being in big trouble and staring the Europa League in the face again. Ultimately, I still feel good, and this is point 2, about Barcelona's chances of turning this thing around and getting into the knockout stage. I am just that skeptical of Inter Milan at this point. This performance did nothing to change my mind about Inter. They had to have it, they got it. It's very similar to what's happening, like I just talked about, in the Liverpool-Napoli group. All that's happening is basically you're just shifting pressure back and forth. One team has the edge, and so the other team then has to get the result. And when that team gets the result, all of a sudden it goes back to the other team, and they have to deliver. And so Inter needed this one. They got it. Barca need to make sure they take care of business in the second half, right? If you win the reverse, all of a sudden you're in a really good position, and I still like Barcelona's chances much better than Inter's of finding a way to get points off Bayern. So I'm not wavering from my belief Barcelona are going to go through. But they are the team under pressure now. They have got to actually do this. You are to a point where playing well is not good enough, and they were much better in that first half against Bayern than they were in this game. I'm not trying to say those two games were those two performances were equal. But on the balance of play, they deserved at least a point out of this one, and they didn't get it. And then finally, the other game I want to highlight, Chelsea, AC Milan. AC Milan is the one Italian team outside of Napoli and Atalanta who don't really factor in this conversation because they're not in Europe, who I felt okay about so far. I've talked about this before. Juventus, disastrous at times. Inter, incredibly disappointing. You know, you look at some of the other teams in the other European competitions, hasn't particularly gone great for them. AC Milan was the one team where they've done fine. It hasn't been great, but it also hasn't been awful. They've done enough to just kind of hang in there and, you know, not put themselves in a huge hole. Did enough to put themselves in a good position heading into this game, Champions League wise. They just haven't blown me away. And here comes the performance that now makes me skeptical. They had 3 total shots. One of them was on target. Rafael Leao was exceptionally quiet, except for one moment, basically. Now, yes, that moment almost led to a goal. But he's so special. He's so dynamic. You need him more involved in the game. They just had nothing going offensively. And then there's the other part of this, which is, I don't think I have ever seen what happened on Wesley Fofana's goal before. AC Milan failed to mark, to varying degrees, whether there was a player in the general vicinity or not. You know, that answer depended on which of the 3 consecutive corners Thiago Silva got his head on the ball. And the third one, finally, he makes contact and it stays in play and Wesley Fofana is able to poke it into the net. The first one was bad enough. How they let him get on the second one unopposed is beyond me. And how they let it happen again after that is incomprehensible. And then Chelsea continued to add. Reece James was excellent. To me, I'm not gonna go off on a tangent on this, but I will say real quickly, if you're wanting to find an argument to not play Trent Alexander-Arnold in the English men's national team, basically Reece James, to me, is the strongest argument you have, that you just feel really good about that option. Of course, You have other players that would, in terms of whether Trent Alexander-Arnold is actually on the plane to Qatar or not, Reece James is not the only player that factors into that. But from a starting standpoint, in my mind, Gareth Southgate is justified in saying, I just would rather have Reece James. He is playing that well. He was spectacular in this game. So Graham Potter gets a comfortable win. And now all 4 teams in this group are within 2 points of each other. Salzburg get their first win after drawing both of these 2 teams. So they're at the top right now. But this is going to be one of the more interesting groups moving forward. And I just have no good feel for it whatsoever. I think there's a really good chance, for example, Chelsea pick up something like 7 points in the second half of the group stage and come out on top. It's getting better and better under Graham Potter. Now, this was much more about their defense than a beautiful Graham Potter expansive attack. They're not there yet on, it was more sort of specifically that Wesley Fofana goal. That was just working set pieces. But the more time you give him, I firmly believe that's going to ultimately work, and they're just going to continue to improve. AC Milan, to me, still no reason to panic. I'm much more concerned about the fact you were capable of having this bad of a performance than I am what it means for your Champions League hopes at this point. But Red Bull Salzburg is still there, and I will continue to believe they have a chance to take down one of these teams. They've already drawn both of them. You have to show up every single game in this group, which is exactly what you want in the Champions League. So this is definitely one to pay attention to moving forward. If I have to predict, you know what? I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to say Chelsea and Red Bull Salzburg are the 2 teams that go through. I'm going to stick with it. Certainly feel like AC Milan have a really good chance, though. They are not in danger territory quite yet, because one win over Red Bull Salzburg, for example, changes things dramatically because everything is so tight here. Or you get a game that team loses a game they're not supposed to. This is a fascinating group, so I wanted to highlight that, and specifically this game, because this makes me worry much more about AC Milan and their ability to repeat as Serie A champions, and their ability to be a real factor in this Champions League when we get to quarterfinals, semifinals. Because that's the next step for all of these Italian teams, is can somebody actually make a run at becoming European champions, because we haven't had that in a little while. Then the other results to get to quickly, some other things I wanted to highlight. Marseille beat Sporting Lisbon all of a sudden, and Spurs draw Frankfurt, Group D, another one of those that's pretty much wide open. Spurs continue to struggle offensively. They got to figure that out. Not having Dejan Kulusevski is part of that, but it is not an explanation for why they've been so poor in attack. Talked about Club Brugge before. They're now up to a 6-point cushion in Group B. 6-point cushion. Everything is going perfectly for them. Of course, they won all 3 of their games. But also everybody else is just sitting there kind of in the exact same spot, so nobody is even close to them. So even if things go horribly in the second half of the group stage, they still have a terrific chance. I mean, they could probably not get another point and qualify for the knockout stage. So congratulations, Club Brugge. Fantastic job. The other thing I wanted to mention here, that second spot is up for grabs. Xabi Alonso is coming in at Bayer Leverkusen. This is our next experiment in, can we find the former legendary player and pop him into a managerial spot that, from a resume standpoint, he is not qualified for, and see if he can work some magic. We'll see what happens here. I'm intrigued by this, and he is going to not only walk into a team in the Champions League, but walk into a team in the Champions League with a real chance to get to the knockout stage. So that will be fascinating. Juventus, RB Leipzig get their first wins of the Champions League. And then the other game I want to talk about for a second, Benfica draw at home with PSG. PSG controlled most of the game. PSG had the better chances, especially in the second half. Neymar almost scored a spectacular goal. Kylian Mbappe almost curled one into the corner. But I want to talk about Benfica for a second too. They finally actually failed to win a game this season over the weekend. So now you've got 2 draws in a row, but they have been, they're still undefeated. They're still in a terrific position in the Champions League, doing great domestically. They are quite simply one of the 15 to 20 best teams in the world, however you want to slice it. And so once I saw what they did to Juventus, I really jumped on board. And if you see my top 25s, that's really when I started saying, okay, I need to take them from 22, 23 to in the teens. And then they just, keep winning week in and week out. And now they just did this against PSG. They probably should have lost, but they didn't. They hung in there defensively, got some good saves from the goalkeeper position, found a way to score a goal. And now they're going to get, the reverse fixture in Paris. But good for you, Benfica. I am all in on this. I think they are incredibly dangerous. To me, if you want to identify a team that's going to be this season's version of Villarreal, or that team, not necessarily in the sense that they're getting to the semifinals, but that team you don't expect to knock somebody out, that waltzes into the knockout stage and ends somebody's Champions League run before they should, that team is Benfica for me. They don't need any kind of tricks. They don't need, now to take down a PSG, they need some luck. But if it's you saw what they did to Juventus. If they get the right draw in the round of 16, absolutely, they can just win that tie by being the better team over 180 minutes. They are that good. This is a team you should be paying attention to.